Welcome to Junkyard Theory, folks, and tonight's guest is Krizan, the Academy Award nominated screenwriter of the Before Sunrise Sunset trilogy. And she is here with us. We've been talking for a few months now, trying to get her on board, but she's finally here. So I am beyond honored to have you on the show, ma'am. Ayubowan.
Abuwan, did I do it right?
Ay-
Ayubowan?
Ayubowan. You got it
Ayubowan.
right.
Ayubowan. I'm
You
so
got it
happy
right.
to talk to you, Akash. Hi,
Thanks for
everybody.
joining. Thanks for joining,
I'm
Kim.
happy to be here.
So I kind of wanted to start off with, your origin story. Like, how did you get into screenwriting? You've been an actress as well, and you've written screenplays, you've written books. So I want to kind of go right back to the beginning and hear you talk about how you entered this industry.
Well, let's see. So I was an English major and I was a psychology minor. I was working on my master's degree and I loved books and I loved stories and I absolutely loved character. And a friend of mine told me that a little tiny film was being shot in the town that I lived in at the time, which was Austin, Texas. And he said it was a little tiny student film. And he said that they were casting. And I said that I had never acted before. And he said, oh, that doesn't matter. It's just a little student film. Just run down and meet the director because he's meeting different people, thinking of putting them in his little film. And so I did just for fun, and I didn't think anything would come of it. It ended up that the little tiny film was Slacker, which became kind of a cult favorite that went around the world. Have you seen Slacker?
Quite a while back.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. This
yeah.
is the
So
1991 movie. I think Linklater is probably his first.
yes, his
Yeah.
first. And I think that the year that I met him was around 1989. So he put me in his film, but our the audition to be in Slacker was just me talking about my life. So I told him that I was an English major, going for my master's degree, working on my master's thesis, and he put me in his film Slacker. And then he always asked me, are you done with your master's thesis yet? Can I read it? Can I read it? I thought he was just being polite. But finally, I'd finished my master's thesis. I got my master's degree, English and psychology. And I ran into him and he said, have you finished your master's thesis? And I said, yes. He said, well, give it to me. And so I remember I gave it to him on a Monday and he called me on Tuesday and asked me to meet him the following day, Wednesday, in a restaurant in Austin. And I met him there and he had my master's thesis sitting on the table when I came into the restaurant. And he said, I've read it. I love it. Would you like to write a movie with me? So that was that was my entrance into screenwriting. Because I told him, well, I've never written a screenplay before. I wasn't a film major. I was an English major, but obviously I'm like well versed in story and character and psychology of the psychology of people. And so he said, well, it doesn't matter that you haven't written a screenplay. You can write. And I found that that was the case for me when we sat down and wrote together. Um, Screenwriting is a very visual medium, and I'm visual, and I know, I'm interested in character. And so we eventually sat down to work on this screenplay, and all he knew at the time is that he wanted to write a boy-girl story, some sort of boy-girl story, maybe a romance. And so we got together and we just started out by just talking generally and just brainstorming. And I told him that I had done a lot of traveling and I had gone by myself to Europe, to England, and I had traveled around by train. And that sometimes on the train, you meet people and you have a wonderful conversation with them. Maybe you get off and maybe you sightsee a bit together, but then you have to part ways. So there's a finite sort of relationship there. And I had met people in England traveling around. I've met people in Europe traveling around, and people I won't forget that I had wonderful conversations with. And so he thought that was a great, like, finite sort of a template for us to work on our story together. And so we had a structure, which was they meet on a train, they spend some time together, they have to part ways. And then from then on, we just did a lot of brainstorming. So that's how we wrote Before Sunrise, which was my very first screenplay ever, which is kind of crazy.
And what a film that turned out to be. So I'm assuming, based on what you told me, you kind of wrote yourself into Julie Delpy's character.
Well, so Julie Delpy at the time, she hadn't been cast, of course, but
Yeah.
so the character of the female to a large degree is me, because, you know, I sat down with Rick and I'm creating a lot of the female dialogue. I think there were times when Rick and I traded off and maybe he wrote some female dialogue and I wrote some male dialogue. But for the most part, Rick and I were just going back and forth, imagining a conversation. And at the time that we wrote that screenplay, Rick and I were friends, and we had, you know, we went and played pinball an awful lot. That was kind of our thing, was playing pinball and having conversations while we were playing pinball. And so we were able to easily have this sort of dialogue of like playing tennis back and forth, you know, in a way of, you know, him a great line and a funny story, and I hit back and he hits back. So to a large degree, those characters are us. And then after the fact, long after the fact, the actors were cast, and they brought their unique personalities into the story as well. But you know, for the most part, we're dealing with Rick and I volleying back and forth.
And in the years since you wrote Before Sunrise, you've written so much more. Like, you've written nonfiction books, you've written various other screenplays, and you've also been involved in comic books as well.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you're a very visual person. So how has your process kind of evolved, you know, throughout the ages? Your writing process.
I think that as one goes on, one learns technical things that perhaps in the beginning you just do intuitively. I find that people intuitively understand story because we're also immersed in story from the time we're tiny children. You know, we hear stories, we watch stories, we tell stories, and we're very immersed in it. But as you go on, you learn some of the technical terms and tricks. And you understand why, for example, the story turns at certain points. So I think I'm just aware now. Like when I first wrote with Rick, I wasn't aware of screenwriting terms at all, or that you have turning points at certain, you know, moments in the story. Now, of course, I'm well aware of that sort of thing, but we were just doing, or I was just doing those things intuitively in the beginning. But I find that as a person who's taught writing and who's taught story, that most people intuitively have an understanding of story. And I think that's because story mimics certain natural processes in life. You know, life is, we're a struggle to achieve. And that's really what a story does, is you're beset with problems in a story. You meet characters, they live in a particular sort of world, and they have problems. And over the course of the story, they are desperately trying to solve those problems and have some sort of ending or resolution. And then in a story, there's that false ending, because in life, we continue to go on and on and on until the very end. But in a story, we just have this package of someone solving a problem. And so I realized that really mimics what we do in life, because at every point in our lives, like say with this pandemic, we're trying to get through the pandemic, we're trying to survive. You go to a school and you try to achieve and get your master's degree. You know, you meet somebody on the train, you like them, and you want to establish a relationship. At every point, there's a problem you're trying to solve, and in essence, that is simply what a story is a character or characters trying to solve problems. And in the end, hopefully they achieve their goal, you know? So in essence, that's what story is. It's just mimicking what we all go through every day.
Yeah, and you focus quite a lot on creativity as well. You used to teach at UCLA, and you have the same UCLA level course available on your Patreon, which you can talk about as well. Talk to me a bit about the creative process. Like you kind of from what I've read about you at least, you try to tap into the creative potential that your students have like within them in their subconscious. So the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind. Like the subconscious is more powerful. Like it stores everything from your past, and you try to bring them up through storytelling. And but not everybody has the capacity to tap into it like that. And it's a learning process. So it's
Yeah.
something I'm assuming that you focus on through your course as well. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I think everybody is creative. I believe everyone is just naturally creative. It's just that for some people it is easier to tap into it because perhaps we have certain tasks in life that require creativity, and we have certain tasks that don't. And so some people have been trained out of their creativity, but usually I find that when they're in my classes, that it's possible to reconnect. And so I have a number of tricks. I really believe in stream of consciousness writing, and we do an awful lot of that in my classes, and we do that on my Patreon class that I'm teaching, this online writing class that I'm teaching on the Patreon website. But I use a lot of tricks to basically get people to open up. And I find that a big one that really affects people is a block, really a writer's block, a creative block that is, in essence, people are afraid of being judged. And this is a very normal and human thing that we all experience, but they're afraid of being judged. And so I try to unplug that very early in the class. And I know, like, I experienced that with writers, my own writing process. I think everybody experiences that, just that block. And so through lots of experimentation over many years, I figured out ways to kind of unplug that, to basically quiet that down, because to survive in our society, we have to be aware of other people and aware of their wants and needs, or else we're going to simply get ourselves in trouble. So it's normal that we care about others' opinions and we care about being judged. It's completely normal and healthy. But taken to an extreme, it's not good for our creativity. And it can really shut us down and make us quite miserable. I mean, if we didn't have it at all, I suppose we'd all end up, in big trouble too. We'd end up in jail, or we'd be in big trouble. But so we need to have a balance with that. So I work very hard to get my students at a place where they can balance. It's basically the two sides of the brain, the right and the left brain, to find that perfect balance where you have control and yet you're free. And we have to stand right in the middle of the two. And the control and the freedom, represent the two sides of the brain and how they function. And so we work very hard on that in class, to just chill that out and find the balance. And I find that some people find relief right away. Like I'm class number 1, class number 2, they come to me and they feel unburdened and they're able to be creative. For some people, it takes, a little bit longer, maybe a couple of weeks, but it's possible to shut down creative blocks and find your creativity and then start working fairly happily and productively.
That's amazing. Like this is the first time I'm hearing about, a writer talking about the things he just mentioned, balancing, that it's a balancing act. So yeah, I mean, I probably should take the class to, reduce my writer's block. So, yeah. Kim, just want to go back to, Before Sunrise. So it seems like a very simple concept, but what the characters talk about, that's deep. And not for one moment in the film do you essentially feel bored. Like, it's two people walking from one place to the other, talking about their experiences, various concepts about life, philosophies. How did you guys come to that place where you were sure, all right, people aren't going to be bored with the content that they're going to be, talking about? Like, were you guys, did you know about that, or was it like, okay, it's a leap of faith?
A total leap of faith. I don't think that you ever know. You don't know if the movie is even going to be made. You don't know if anyone's going to read it. You don't know if you're going to be able to get anyone involved at all. You have no idea if it's going to touch people. You have no idea, nothing. It is an absolute 100% leap of faith. But Rick and I, when we used to convert, I mean, he reads a lot and is interested in ideas, and I read a lot as well, and I'm interested in ideas, and I think we're both quite open-minded people who like to toss ideas back and forth, and so I find that's what people are responding to in Before Sunrise, is that these characters are tossing ideas back and forth. You have to remember, the movie was written in the early 90s. We wrote it in 1993. And those were the sorts of things we were thinking about at the time. I mean, like, thank God that those ideas are still of interest to people today. I guess there's some, universal quality to the thing that they were talking about. People, they were in their 20s, they're exploring ideas about the world and about love and about gender and about, connecting. And these are things that, we were thinking about. I mean, the whole movie was really, the whole point of the movie was really about people connecting in the moment. And this is something I found on my travels by myself in England and Europe on trains, is that I knew that there was most likely I was never ever going to see these people again that I was having these rich conversations with. And if we didn't have the internet back then, and so sometimes we did not even exchange last names. We knew each other's first name, and usually that was it. And we would, we might have a fantastic conversation on a train for 5 hours, say, from one town to the next, and there was no real reason for us to not be honest and connect and get to know one another. It's so interesting to meet people from other cultures. If I were to meet you, say, on a train, I would be asking you so many questions about your culture. I've not been to Sri Lanka, and I would ask you so many questions about the issues in Sri Lanka right now. I mean, we talked just a teensy bit about the pandemic. I would be asking you a lot of questions about that, about the mores, the religion, the politics, the youth culture. I mean, I would ask you 1,000 questions, and I bet you that you would ask me 1,000 questions. And because it's an opportunity to connect with, I mean, this is amazing enough that we're connecting on the internet right now. You're literally on the other side of the world, and I'm talking to you as if you're in a train car with me. So these were incredible experiences for me. I was a young person. I was traveling by myself. And I will never forget the people that I traveled with. Also, because I didn't have a phone, I didn't even have a decent camera. I just had those little tiny portable cameras. Those little ones, I just had,
The Polaroid cameras.
yeah, lousy little, and so
Yeah.
I barely even have pictures of people, but they live in my mind. And they, I won't forget the connections that we had. So that's what we were trying to do in the film, is to capture that kind of feeling of connecting with people and then having to say goodbye. It's you go back home, and it's 8 hours away by plane. And so they live in your memory as someone who affected you, someone who maybe enriched your life, but you'll never see them again.
It's pretty bittersweet at the same time, right? Like you connect with somebody on, like, maybe on different levels. You talk about various things with them, but at the end of the day, you gotta say goodbye. And it's kind of like it's similar to how you enjoy time with a film. You have a beginning, and then like an hour or two later, you're done with it. Like if you enjoyed the movie, you're kind of hesitant to uh, part with it in a way. You don't want it to end sometimes.
I know exactly. I think that's why people so desperately want things to continue, or they want to learn about how the movie was made and all the background information. And that really, it's not that. It's that story, and it's the saying goodbye at the end that's sad. People don't want it to end. They want to live in that world. And that's how it is when you meet a great person and then you have to say goodbye. You want to stay immersed in that world, but the life goes on, the moment changes. So I think there's a bittersweet quality really to the whole thing,
100%. Yeah. You travel a lot. So, with the pandemic affecting and restricting travel the past 2 years, how has that changed your life, and essentially, translated to you to how you write as well?
Yeah. Yeah, it has been interesting to spend a lot more time at home. I've noticed that I have gone very internal because of being at home and spending so much time by myself, and um, spending a lot more time, I suppose, on the internet. Is an interesting thing. I've been able to travel once just recently for my birthday. We kind of risked it. We had to get all our, make sure we had to be tested and all that, but I went to Jamaica, and that was really interesting. I was dying to go to another culture and experience another culture a little bit, because we've been stuck here for a long time, and I have a whole list of places I want to travel to. So we're waiting for this all to end so that we can safely go all over the world. But I think my process is probably to go more internal. And that's interesting because I realized that a lot of the stimulation for writing comes from going out into the world, talking with people, and getting that battery charge from going out in the world and then coming back home. And so I think that's been difficult. I know I've had friends say that being stuck at home is, felt like they're in solitary confinement and they can't recharge, which is why they're diving deeper and deeper into the internet, in an effort to recharge. But I think it is changing people's process. And I think the good thing is that we're all learning new things about ourselves from this pandemic. We're learning new things about how we function and what we need. And I know that I've heard a lot of people say that they're learning about themselves, you know. It's an opportunity. Every time you're beset with a challenge like this, it's an opportunity to learn. So
That's very true, because during the pandemic, like I think around 2 or 3 months into it, there was this post I came across the internet where it said, if you can't go outside, go inside. And that's the only space you can go out and go out in and venture and essentially reflect on things that you absorbed the past, I don't know how many years that anyone has walked the planet. And it allows more time for you to kind of like come to terms with certain things, gestate it, reflect on it, and then essentially sometimes make peace with certain things, and put that creativity out in the form of a screenplay or any form of medium. And I've seen, and I'm pretty sure you have as well, crazily creative things have kind of come out of the pandemic, and so it's not always a bad thing.
absolutely. I'm a big believer in keeping journals. My master's thesis was on written about a famous diarist named Annie Nin, who kept a diary literally her entire life. And I believe that sitting down and writing can, it's making amorphous thoughts tangible, because you're putting them down in what is essentially a code, you know, a language. You're using tools, a tool of language to describe your experience, which has no form. And by sitting down and writing out what it is you think, what it is you feel, what you've experienced, memories, you know, and getting those down in the, what is the chicken scratch of language, you create an object and a form that then you can, sometimes I think things can be solved simply by sitting down and journaling them out. I know I experienced that a lot, and I think it's just great for all writers. I'll have feelings, I won't quite be, or you know, thoughts and experiences, memory, and I can't quite get it sorted out. But if I sit down and write it out, it starts to take a form, and I understand the meaning of it, what it means in my life, the purpose of it, or how I can give it purpose and give it a point. And so I think that's very healthy for everybody to do, is to sit down and write out what it is they're thinking. And sometimes out of that, you're going to end up like Anais Nin has a humongous diary that's been published that covers her life, but you might end up having a poem, or you might end up having a screenplay, or you might end up having an essay or something, out of the experience of sitting down and journaling. So as a writing teacher, I'm a big believer in journaling. Keep having your little secret journal that nobody sees, where it's a laboratory for you to test out thoughts, feelings, memories.
Also, a pretty good tool to get out of the whole "will I be judged" bubble.
Absolutely. Especially if you make sure nobody sees it, So that's how I tell my students to do it. Nobody's allowed to see your journal. No one. You have to, if you think somebody's going to sneak around and find your journal and read it, you have to hide it, because you need a place where you can spill it all out, freely spill it out without the fear of judgment, whatever the feeling is, the thought is. And once you see it in black and white, it pulls it out of you. It makes it tangible. And then you can see what it is. And if you put it away for a while and then maybe come back to it and read it later after you've forgotten it, then you really see what it is. And it's free of that judge coming from the outside, you know? So it's very, very good for you, very healthy, and good for shutting down that inner critic.
Whole thing about giving some distance to what you've written and then coming back to it, like I think it applies a lot to writing screenplays or any medium for that matter. How do you find the whole taking a break from what you've written and coming back to it with fresh eyes, a fresh perspective sometimes? How has that contributed to the story essentially evolving further?
Oh yeah, I really think that's a very good idea, because as you know, when you are in the midst of it, sometimes you just kind of can't see, you go blind, you can't see what you have because you're so emotionally involved. And you're caught in this like tidal wave of stuff. And so to maybe come to a stopping point, or to finish a project and then put it away for as long as it takes to forget about it. So if that's a week, if that's a month, whatever it is, and then come back to it when you are feeling refreshed, you've rested, you've recharged by maybe going out and doing some different things besides think about this writing project, right? You've gone out and maybe had a little bit of fun and relaxed, and you come back to it and you see, like you say, with fresh eyes. And then for one thing, mistakes will jump out at you. You'll see what you need to add or what you need to take away. But you just, in general, you see what you've accomplished, what you've done. And it helps you be your own editor or your own critic. advise my students to do that rather than to take their work to other people. They need to be the first judge of their work, and they need to do that before they go to other people and ask other people for their opinions, because other people have their own tastes, you know, and they may not have the same goals for a creative project. And who knows where they're coming from with, you know. So I think it's better for you to put your thing aside, come back to it, and then you'll see what you have. And then maybe at that point, you may want to carefully select other people to give you some feedback. But you're right. See your work with fresh eyes. That is so crucial.
What about, you work with Richard on those screenplays, and working with somebody else, a co-writer. How does that dynamic kind of work for you? Because you're not the only person who's contributing ideas. You have somebody else. Maybe sometimes if you tend to kind of go out of not out of line, but if you tend to go off on a tangent, they can pull you in, and you can do the same thing to them. Keep yourselves probably hold the other person accountable. How has working with a co-writer helped you out?
Well, there's good and there's bad to working with a co-writer. When Rick and I worked together, we worked very quickly. He was very disciplined. I'm quite disciplined too, but we worked on it every night for a certain it was I believe it was something like 16 days. So there was an automatic incentive for me to work, because I'm working with this other person who asked me. He already had a movie out and he asked me to work with him. So there's an incentive for me to be there and to, we worked all night long generally, especially toward the end. We were working, we'd start maybe around, the time the sun went down or so, and we'd work around the time the sun went up. So there was an incentive to be disciplined about the work. But when you're working with somebody else, they automatically will, there's certain parameters at that point. They add things to the project that you would not come up with, but they take away things as well. And because they have their own, way. And so there's a chemistry that develops, and you hope it's a good chemistry. I mean, I think we have all heard of partnerships out there that are very fruitful. And then there are some that are just, you often hear about creative differences, that people are on different paths. So I encourage everyone to try to work alone, especially in the beginning, because you're getting to know yourself and your own ways. And you need that freedom, I think. You need the freedom to openly express yourself. But sometimes it can be great to run into someone that you have great chemistry with, and you can bounce ideas off of, and they make you better. And the sum of the parts, what you end up having at the end is more than the sum of the parts, because your chemistry became another entity altogether. So there's such a thing as a great partnership, but I think in the beginning, it's very good to work alone, to find your own way.
That's good advice. So you mentioned, you come back to something you've written like maybe months later, you're looking at it with fresh eyes, and you see you're essentially editing it. And you can continue this process for as long as you like, but where do you kind of draw the line? When do you know enough is enough?
That's such a, because you could go on forever, right? Noodling around, and oh my God, and it could become something else entirely. You just have to, at some point, like, put the thing to bed, right? You have to, at some point, I mean, you could even say, like, abandon the project, abandon ship, because you can go on forever and ever and ever. I think it's more like you resolve it in yourself, and you feel, for me, creative projects are generally big questions that I have about the world that I want to tackle. Maybe there are also personal questions, but oftentimes what I've written about are things that bother me. Like there's something in the world that bothers me. There's something in the world that upsets me. And by writing about it, I'm able to internally really meditate on it, sort it out, and tackle it. And then it feels organic to me. It feels like I'm processing it. Sometimes it's quite painful, but I'm processing it. I'm trying to digest the idea. And then at some point, I feel organically, I come to the end of the process. I have my answer. It's personal, it's internal, but I'm done. And I don't want to look at that anymore. So I think people should, instead of noodling around for forever and ever, I think they should tune inward and feel when they have come to in a personal resolution or fruition, let's say, with the project, and they can just push it out into the world, and then it becomes something else entirely. You know, then it's outside of you, it's floating out in the world. People are having their own experiences with your project, you know, your baby, and hopefully they're being nice to your baby. hopefully hopefully they like the baby and they're being good to it. But it's outside of you at that point, and you let it go, and you don't feel it so much. At least that's my experience. You don't feel it. It's at that point, it's very objective, and you see that other people are having reactions and they have their own opinions, but I'm no longer so emotional about it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Like at one point you say, all right, enough. I'm gonna like remove myself from the project. I've given everything that I can. This is as far as I can go, or as far as I should probably go. Because sometimes if you spend too much with it, like, it's a rabbit hole. Like you don't see an end.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, nothing's ever perfect. I think maybe it's accepting the imperfection of anything you work on. You can go down the rabbit hole is a big one. You could go down the rabbit hole forever. And there's no end to it. You just have to accept nothing's perfect. Let it go off into the world in its imperfect state, you know?
This is exactly what I was gonna come to next about perfectionism, because some people try to edit while they write, which
Ah,
I've kind of seen is like a very vicious trap that they fall into. It's a vicious cycle. And they end up, feeling demotivated and fatigued, not even halfway through the process, and they decide to abandon ship before it's done building. So
yeah.
that's a whole different calamity in itself, I guess.
So I find that people have different methods. For some people, it's just spill it on out, just spill it out, and then take the break from it, cool down, and then come back and edit and bring your objective brain to that editing process. Some people sort of do it every day. Like, for example, Ernest Hemingway, the great writer, he would every morning sit down and look at what he had written the previous day, reread it, and then while he was reading it, he might tweak, and then come to the point that he had stopped and then continue on with another chunk that then the next day he would see and then tweak. So I suppose in a way he was doing just a little bit of baby editing every day to start his process, but it was like warming up to the big spill. But I think of it in terms of the spill out is where you want to be very free, and you don't want to judge yourself too harshly. You don't want that inner critic interrupting you, because it will stop you. It will say, that's a stupid idea, it will just stop you. So you need to tell it to shut up and just let you spill it out. And then when you come back with that critic, there you are the, I think of it in terms of the two sides of the brain. The spill brain, the free part, kind of mimics it's like the ancient gods Dionysus and Apollo. Dionysus was the god of freedom, of wine, of partying, right? Freedom. There weren't rules. Apollo was the god of order, being very careful. Now, either side, too much is not healthy. Either side, is could end up being a bad thing. But in balance, they're very good. So whether you do the Dionysian spill in one big shot and then come back later with the Apollonian editor, or you do a little bit every day, I think that depends on your process, what is more comfortable for you. For me, I like to do a nice big spill and then come back later with some structure.
You create the vomit draft. At least that's what we call it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's by hand. I work by hand. And because for some reason, I don't know why, but scientists have found that when you write by hand, that you access deeper parts of the brain than you do when you're on the computer. I don't know why, but you do. So it's good to work by hand in a big notebook and just get it all down in a big messy brainstorm. And then later, maybe you're typing it in, and that's maybe a different part of the brain. I don't know, but it's a different process.
So you write everything, like when you are writing a screenplay, you write it by hand.
Well, no, I do my brainstorming by hand. I brainstorm, and then and the brainstorm, it may be that I'm maybe have a bubble over here and maybe a bubble over here, and how some people work when they brainstorm, it's all linear, and some people have that bubble thing they do so I think that's mimicking what's going on in their brains.
Essentially, you're
And
creating the whole mind map.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I find that it's really helpful. You can't really do those bubble things very easily on the computer. And another thing is, on the computer, since it's only like this big, right? I can't work that way at the beginning. I have to have things all spread out so that I can like see things visually. Like I have pieces of paper and I'm moving things around. I have to have it spread out. I could not work on this thing. It would irritate me. So I might be on the floor, or I might have stuff on a coffee table or something, and I'm thinking and arranging. So that's what works for me.
That's cool. I mean, I guess I have a similar process, because at the start, I ever so rarely start on the computer. It's almost always on paper, like you said, creating mind maps, like letting it all kind of like spill through those 12 inches between head and paper, which is like the longest distance in the whole universe. And then thereafter, putting it all together and finally typing it up. And speaking of, typing up on the computer, you've been a spokesperson for Final Draft, the software as well, I guess, in 2007, was it?
They asked me to be a spokesperson, right? So they had little ads with my picture. I was in a jungle. I was in a little jungle, and they asked me to come up with a line that they had for the advertisement and everything. So yeah, that was fun. And I just used Final Draft on a project just recently. So Final Draft is great. It's a really great formatting program. It's excellent.
Yeah. I want to just inquire and see, do you find that there are any transferable skills that, you probably, that probably come from like different other walks of life, which have contributed to your writing process at all?
So yes. I mean, if you've had any difficulties in your life, it's a very good thing for writing, any kind of difficulty, problems with people. Yes. Very helpful. Have people driven you nuts? Yes. That is a transferable skill. You survived horrible people. That skill transfers wonderfully well into writing. um, if you know, writing is, I mean, um, you,
That's
I
too
mean,
good.
um, you know, I mean, people, you know, if you've dealt with people and you've had to be observant, and as a child, you've had to develop ways of coping and ways of surviving and ways of reading people. I became a very astute observer of people at a very young age because, you know, I grew up in a complicated family. And so I became very, very observant, and I'm still observant. And I find that that really helps with writing. I find people endlessly interesting. And I listen a lot to conversations going on around me because I find them so oftentimes so funny, or, you know, so if any kind of um, observational skills that you've had to develop for survival are very good. I mean, Hemingway said that the absolute best uh, preparation for being a writer is having a rough childhood. So difficulty in your family, in your culture, in your community, these will not only give you all kinds of fodder for writing for the rest of your life, but they also gave you a lot of tools for reading people and for observing people that will really help with writing. I also I love travel, and there's something about being taken out of your environment and put in a new environment that really makes you awake. And I love that experience of just because you're in a strange environment, you're forced to really pay attention. And so I find travel to be very valuable for creative work. Well, often while traveling, I have a lot of ideas about what I should be working on and doing. And so I think travel is really good. I was a psychology minor and a literature major. And so those, I find really, for being a screenwriter, I think if you open your lens beyond the world of film and you say study literature, study history, study anthropology, you know, and science, these things all open your lens up wide so that you have all kinds of energy and perspective for writing.
At the same time, you performed, you acted as well. Has that kind of helped you perhaps write dialogue better? Because sometimes, you write dialogue, but when an actor comes and, reads it out, like it might not sound natural at all. They might say, you know what, this works on paper, but it might not work. I can't say it out loud. So having performed, like, has it kind of helped you too?
Um, I think that my natural process is when I am writing, I am acting out the part in my head. So I think it might be the other way around. I think that maybe instead of acting helping me write, I think maybe writing helped me act. I'm not sure about that because nobody's ever asked me that question quite that way, Akash. So that's interesting, but they are closely related. You know, they are related. And I acted in, say, Richard Linklater's Slacker. That was when I met him, and I actually wrote my own lines for that because he was listening to a conversation I was having with the other actresses, and he said, "I want you guys just to do that." He said, "Just I want you, Kim, to amp up the negative." And the girl I was talking with, he wanted her to amp up the sort of dreaminess. And so, but those were our words. And then when I was in Waking Life, those were actually that was a lecture that I used to give to students I actually would still give to students today, about, because I have, when students come into an English class, I always feel like I need to give them some perspective on why we're learning to write. And it has to do with connection and trying to understand one another. And so those were my words. But I think when a writer is working on dialogue, because it is a frustrating thing for actors, I think, when they have dialogue that doesn't feel natural. I think if the screenwriter imagines, if they just contact that character in their head and they act it out as they're writing, I think they'll find the words, the naturalistic words. And it won't, and they will, and the dialogue of each character will be unique to them. So I think it starts with that writer really acting as they sit there writing, if that makes sense.
It does. I think I've kind of experienced something similar as well, but I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, and that's interesting. So, have you kind of noticed instances where you've written something one way, and then you've done the editing by yourself, you handed it over to somebody who you hopefully trust to give you feedback, but they make a comment on something, and they don't necessarily seem to see how this particular point or something that you've written in this scene pays off like multiple scenes down the line. Like there's this very specific reason you might not be able to change it. And if so, how do you kind of, take that feedback on board, given that it's good feedback, and try to adapt it into your storyline?
I really think that right, it depends on whether it's good feedback. So it is very possible that you have someone read your work and they just don't get it. And not because you've made mistakes, but because it's not their thing. And so I think that you can tell when this is my method. If someone gives you feedback and they say, I didn't understand this bit here, and if you immediately go, oh God, yes, I need to clarify that. If you feel it internally, then bingo, make a small change to make whatever that is, to clarify that point or whatever the criticism was. If someone gives you some feedback and you don't feel it, then I think, no, the feedback doesn't work for you or your process or your project, because you will instantly feel what you need to do. It's kind of an organic thing. If it could be that you were coming to that viewpoint and you just needed someone to just bring it out, and immediately, oh God, yes, that isn't clear enough, I knew that, that's a good time for you to make the change. If you think, oh, nah, that's not, forget it, forget what they're saying, you're not on the same page with them, and do not make the change. They're not the boss of the project, you are the boss of the project. And so their criticism just didn't work for you. Sometimes people give bad feedback, so you can just ignore them. Ignore them and don't ask them again. No more. They don't get to give you feedback anymore.
Final question for the day. Where do you see your writing going in the future? Like, I know you've written, you ventured into comics, you ventured into nonfiction books, narrative fiction as well. What's next in line?
Oh, I just finished writing something. I hope it's so hard to get things out in the world, but I just finished writing something that I have high hopes for. I have a list of possible things. It's all delving into personal, life is long, but it's all delving into personal experiences and issues and questions and problems that you finally feel you're ready to tackle. You finally feel that you're ready to look at. And sometimes the deeper they are, the harder it is to get them up and out. But as I go on, and you kind of care less and less what people think. And so I think it's dealing with like deep personal things that I think have a universal resonance for people. So I'm not sure the form that they'll all take, though. I'm not sure if they're screenplays. I'm not sure they're comic books. I'm not sure if they're essays. I'm really not sure, but the subjects are kind of floating up in my mind.
And seems like, whatever you write essentially is going to live on after you, and that kind of becomes your legacy. So uh, that's some brilliant subject matter that you hope to tackle. So all the best with that, and thank you so much for joining us, Kim. People do go check out her course on patreon.com, the link to which you can find in the description below. So till then, this is Junkyard Theory, folks.